I'm a professor of political science at Loyola University Chicago. I've worked with Paul Rusesabagina and his foundation for over 15 years now, and have now spent nearly the last 2 months working with his family and the team to free Paul from his confinement in Rwanda. A brief recap before we go to the lawyers today. After being kidnapped in Dubai, Paul has now been under illegal arrest in Rwanda for 53 days. Sadly, his family still has limited and heavily monitored communication with Paul. In addition, his team of lawyers are just beginning to get access to Paul, which under international law should have happened on day one of his arrest. Several members of Paul's legal team are here with us today to talk about the situation and provide updates on what has been happening on the legal front over the last 10 days. I'd like to begin by introducing Peter Robinson, one of Paul's American lawyers, who is acting as the lead lawyer on our legal team to discuss the case and put this into context. Peter?
Thank you, Brian. I'm Peter Robinson. I'm a former assistant United States attorney and have been defending accused persons at international criminal courts and tribunals for the past 20 years, including at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. I'm serving as lead counsel for the team of lawyers retained by the family of Paul Rusesabagina to defend him following his illegal transfer to Rwanda. Our team includes lawyers from Rwanda, Belgium, Australia, Canada, and the United States. As you know, Paul Rusesabagina was taken to Rwanda against his will on August 29th in violation of international law. Instead of presenting a request for extradition or deportation to the United States or Belgium, the Rwandan government took Paul Rusesabagina to Rwanda by extrajudicial rendition. Once they arrested Paul in Kigali, the Rwandan government kept him tied, bound, and blindfolded for 3 days before parading him to the news media. Then they provided him with their own defense lawyers. Those of us real lawyers who have been tasked by the family to defend Paul Rusesabagina have watched in agony as his fake lawyers appeared with Paul in court. They failed to challenge his illegal rendition to Rwanda, and they made perfunctory arguments for his provisional release without mentioning his vulnerability to COVID-19, a circumstance that has resulted in the release of thousands of prisoners worldwide during this pandemic. Paul is 66 years old and has heart disease and hypertension. It has now been more than 50 days since Paul was arrested in Rwanda, and the government continues to block our team from defending Paul Rusesabagina. When we have sought access to Paul, the Rwandan government has consistently refused on the ground that Paul has never requested to be represented by the lawyers chosen by his family. This is not the case. Paul has told his family, including his daughter Anais, that he has requested to be defended by the team of lawyers led in Rwanda by Gatera Gashambana, Vincent Lercan, and Philippe Larochelle. Gatera Gashambana is the former president of the Rwandan Bar Association. He has defended the last two of President Paul Kagame's political opponents who were imprisoned, Victoire Ingabire and Diane Rwigara. He has the courage and the experience to fight for his clients, even in the courts of Rwanda. Vincent Lercan is a lawyer from Belgium who has been representing Paul Rusesabagina on the very same charges that the Rwandans asked the Belgian authorities to investigate. He has a wealth of experience in international human rights and won acquittals for two Rwandans, a former governor, Emmanuel Bagambiki, and the former police commander, Augustin Ndindiamana, at the United Nations Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Philippe Larochelle is a lawyer from Canada who has also defended clients at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and won the acquittal of Jacques Mungawariri, a Rwandan man prosecuted in Canada for alleged crimes during the Rwandan genocide. He is currently in Arusha, Tanzania, where he's about to start a trial defending a Rwandan charged with obstruction of justice. We don't understand why the Rwandan government is burdening its taxpayers with paying the legal fees of these government-sponsored lawyers when Mr. Rusesabagina has lawyers ready, willing, and able to defend him at his own expense. The only explanation for this is that they want to control all aspects of the proceedings, the judge, the prosecutor, and even the defense counsel. We are asking the United States, Belgium, and the European Union not to stand by while fundamental rights of its citizens and residents are being violated. Rwanda must respect international law by returning Paul Rusesabagina to the United States or Belgium. Thereafter, it's free to make a proper request for his transfer to Rwanda via extradition or deportation, or to have him prosecuted in Belgium. By illegally transferring him to Rwanda and continuing to deny him his right to counsel of his choice, the Rwandan authorities have shown that they cannot be trusted to provide a fair trial for Paul Rusesabagina. I will now turn this over to Vincent, Philippe, and Anaïs to tell you firsthand the efforts that have been made to provide Paul with legal representation and the obstacles that they have faced. Anaïs? Or perhaps we can go to Vincent first. I see you've joined us, Vincent.
Vincent, if you could please give us an update on what's happened starting with your trip to Kigali, and Philippe will be translating for Vincent.
Philippe, if you can ask Monsieur Lurquin.
Yes, Vincent. Donc, comme on faisait à l'époque, donc des phrases pas trop longues pour que je puisse traduire intégralement, on va dire.
Et voilà, la question est de savoir pourquoi est-ce que l'État rwandais ne veut pas que l'avocat puisse voir son client. Et donc la question qui se pose, c'est de savoir de quoi ils ont peur.
The issue is to find out why Rwanda does not allow Paul to meet with the lawyer of his choice.
De quoi ont-ils peur?
What are they afraid of?
Je vais vous raconter en quelques mots notre voyage, et Philippe a participé en grande partie à celui-ci, pour essayer de vous démontrer que le seul élément qui manque encore dans ce dossier, c'est la parole de Paul Rusesabagina.
I will tell you what happened when I was in Kigali, and I was myself present during some of Vincent's stay in Kigali, to try to understand why Paul is denied a say in this.
Donc, quand on est arrivé à l'aéroport, déjà on a eu 1h30 d'interrogation, parce que visiblement être avocat est un gros mot au Rwanda.
If we
Ça ne passe plus.
Philippe, we may need to ask you to turn off your camera, please, just to save
We
bandwidth.
were interrogated for an hour and a half because it's being a lawyer is already a problem. You know? Yep.
If you could briefly restate that, we lost you for a moment.
Il y a des problèmes, moi je n'entends plus.
Moi j'entends.
Voilà, on peut continuer, parce que moi je n'entendais plus, moi je
So
suis...
already when you arrived, so Vincent was interrogated for an hour and a half when he arrived in Rwanda. Apparently, being a lawyer seems to be a problem over there.
Quand on arrive à la douane, on vous demande quel est votre nom, quelle est votre profession. Et quand on a dit que l'on était avocat de Paul Rusesabagina, directement, on vous a repoussé hors de la file et on a attendu 1h30 avant quand même de vous laisser passer.
So when I arrived at the custom, I stated my name and my profession. I said I was a lawyer, and that was sufficient to have me kicked out of the lineup and put aside for an hour and a half for examination.
Ça, évidemment, c'est pas grave, mais l'ensemble du climat de la semaine qu'on va passer au Rwanda est un peu ce climat de suspicion sur le fait de dire Rusesabagina, c'est un nom dont on ne doit pas parler au Rwanda.
So being put aside for an hour and a half doesn't matter in itself, but what I learned from this is that it seems that Rusesabagina is a name that cannot be said in Rwanda.
Moi, je suis un avocat belge
I'm a
et j'allais
Belgian
voir
lawyer,
dans le cadre d'une procédure belge.
and I already represent him in Belgium. So I was going to see him in Rwanda within the framework of my case in Belgium,
Avec un juge d'instruction belge,
where I already represent Rusesabagina. There is
avec
a
un juge
judge
d'instruction
in
belge
Belgium.
et un procureur belge.
So there is a judge in Belgium, there is a prosecutor in Belgium.
Pourquoi est-ce que l'avocat belge de l'accusé, qui est belge aussi, puisque M. Rusesabagina a la nationalité belge,
Why is a Belgian lawyer of a Belgian citizen, because Mr. Rusesabagina is a Belgian citizen,
ne pourrait pas voir son avocat?
why is Mr. Rusesabagina prohibited from seeing his lawyer, Maître Lurquin?
D'autant plus que la procédure en Belgique a été demandée par les autorités judiciaires rwandaises.
And it's worth outlining that the procedure in Belgium was started at the request of the Rwandan authorities.
Ça fait près de 2 ans qu'on essaye, qu'on interroge M. Rusesabagina en Belgique et que je l'assiste pour essayer de prouver qu'il est coupable de quelque chose.
It's for 2 years now, the Belgium authorities have been examining Mr. Rusesabagina to try to demonstrate that he did something wrong. And I have been assisting him throughout this process.
La dernière audition qu'on a eue devant les enquêteurs belges participait également le procureur général de Kigali et son adjoint.
During the last of these hearings, the Attorney General of Rwanda and his
Prosecutor.
joint were present during the examination of Mr. Prosecutor. The prosecutor of, there was a prosecutor from Kigali.
Et ensemble, avec la justice belge, ils interrogeaient M. Rusesabagina.
And together, Anais, can you,
And together with the Belgian authorities, they were examining Mr. Rusesabagina.
Et à ce moment-là, et c'est la dernière fois que je l'avais vu ici en Belgique, M. Rusesabagina a dit « Je ne répondrai pas à vos questions au procureur rwandais parce que ces gens-là, a-t-il dit, ils veulent me tuer. »
During the last of these examinations, which is the last occasion where Mr. Lurquin had the chance to see Rusesabagina, the prosecutor from Rwanda was trying to ask questions to Mr. Rusesabagina. And Mr. Rusesabagina answered them, "I will not answer your questions because I know you want to kill me."
Heureusement, il n'est pas mort, mais ils l'ont quand même enlevé.
So thank God he's not dead, but he was nevertheless abducted.
Donc, on assiste à un procès qui est un procès uniquement belge. Et la seule chose que l'on doit avoir pour voir M. Rusesabagina, c'est une attestation du bâtonnier du Rwanda, Kavaruganda, pour me permettre d'aller le voir à la prison.
This is, we will not say enough that this is a Belgian procedure. And this is in the context of that Belgian procedure that Mr. Lurquin, Maître Lurquin was trying to see Mr. Rusesabagina in Rwanda. And apparently, the only thing that is necessary is an authorization from the head of the Kigali Bar Association, Mr. Kavuraganda.
Et c'est une des choses les plus inacceptables, tant pour Philippe que pour moi, qui est le fait que celui qui a refusé de nous permettre d'aller voir Paul Rusesabagina, c'est un de nos confrères, le bâtonnier de Kigali.
It is totally unacceptable that the person who is blocking attempts by Maître Lurquin and myself to see Mr. Rusesabagina is actually a lawyer from the bar of Belgium, of Brussels in Belgium.
Nous avons attendu pendant 6 jours.
We waited for 6 days.
Mais entre-temps, il y a quand même des choses positives qui se sont passées.
Despite this long period of waiting, positive things nevertheless happened.
La première chose, c'est que le juge d'instruction belge m'a permis d'avoir la copie du dossier de M. Rusesabagina, alors que vous savez qu'en Belgique, l'instruction est secrète. Nous avons obtenu la copie de son dossier.
The first positive thing that happened is that the judge d'instruction in Belgium allowed Maître Lurquin to have access to the case file, despite the fact that normally these case files in Belgium are completely confidential.
La seconde chose positive, c'est que nous avons obtenu la copie du dossier rwandais de M. Rusesabagina qui est en train d'arriver normalement ici en Belgique.
The second positive outcome is that we managed to secure the Rwandan file of Mr. Rusesabagina, and we are hoping to get it soon here in Belgium.
Et la troisième chose, c'est que le bâtonnier Gatera est allé à la prison, a vu M. Rusesabagina, et M. Rusesabagina a écrit une lettre authentifiée, comme quoi le bâtonnier Gatera et moi-même étions ses conseils.
The third positive outcome is that Mr. Gatera, who has been a bâtonnier of the Kigali Bar Association in the past, has managed to meet with Mr. Rusesabagina, and he has obtained a stamped letter certifying that Maître Gatera and Maître Lurquin are Mr. Rusesabagina's appointed counsels.
Un des éléments quand même essentiels de la défense, c'est le choix du conseil par l'accusé, ce que Rusesabagina n'a jamais eu.
So one of the most important components of a full defense is to be able and to be at liberty to appoint the counsel of one's choice. And Mr. Rusesabagina has been denied that right for too long a time.
Alors je vous avoue que je suis assez étonné de la position du bâtonnier Kavuraganda de Kigali, parce que lui, sa solution, c'était la fuite. Il a disparu.
The attitude of Kavuraganda is actually very surprising because he has effectively disappeared since Maître Lurquin has been trying to get a hold of him to obtain the necessary authorization to be able to visit Mr. Rusesabagina.
Je crois que c'est un élément important aussi avec Maître La Rochelle. On a pu montrer qu'on n'avait pas peur des autorités du Rwanda.
It's actually an important part of it is that we were able to show that we do not fear the Rwandan authorities.
Aujourd'hui, j'ai demandé aux autorités belges de faire en sorte que la commission rogatoire qui devrait partir de Belgique, l'on puisse en faire partie.
Today, I have asked the Belgian authorities to be a member or to be included in the rogatory commission that is ordered by the Belgian authorities.
Il n'est pas possible dans le débat judiciaire que vous n'ayez qu'un juge, un procureur du Rwanda et que l'avocat soit exclu de ce débat judiciaire. Et donc, je crois effectivement que dans une quinzaine de jours, on va pouvoir retourner au Rwanda, mais là pour revoir Paul Rusesabagina.
So it is unacceptable. It would be unacceptable that a rogatory commission within the framework of the Belgian procedure takes place only in presence of the judge, the prosecutor, the Belgian prosecutor, the Rwandan prosecutor, without Mr. Rusesabagina having the chance to be assisted by the lawyer of his choice.
Et donc, je pense que, effectivement, d'ici 15 jours, 3 semaines, on pourra retourner au Rwanda avec la commission rogatoire et là, on verra Paul Rusesabagina.
So normally, that rogatory commission is set to leave in 2 weeks, and I should be a part of it, which would allow me to see Mr. Rusesabagina.
Voilà, ma première intervention maintenant. Je vous écoute.
That's it. I'm now listening to you.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Laquan. Philippe, if we can ask you to give a little bit of an update too, since you were also in Kigali, and let us know the issues that you ran into in Kigali.
Just to complete a little bit the picture that Vincent has described, I myself got to Kigali a week or 10 days before Vincent arrived in Kigali. I was going there as part of this trial here in Arusha that Peter has mentioned earlier, but I was also going there, and I made it clear when I arrived at the airport that I was going to Rwanda to meet with Mr. Rusesabagina. So the reaction of the custom officer was to, exactly like what happened to Vincent, to to ask me to leave the line and to wait for people, because people would like to speak to me, not mentioning what they wanted to discuss. So I had to wait for an hour and a half. Somebody came and asked me a few questions about who was the client and what I wanted to do.
Philippe, unfortunately, we're losing your audio.
Brian, why don't you introduce Anais, and we will come back to Philippe if his microphone comes back on.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask Anais Kanimba.
Was finally allowed through. I also had for my mission to enter Rwanda. So immediately after I entered Rwanda, I'm sorry. Am I back online?
You cut out several times, Philippe. Why don't we try it one more time? And if not, we'll go to Anais. If you can just briefly go from the beginning, we lost much of what you said.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oui.
So I'll try to be brief. I encountered the same difficulties as Vincent in trying to meet with Paul. I encountered the same difficulties with the bâtonnier. I even managed to obtain a letter from my bâtonnier at their request to ask the bâtonnier to allow me to meet with Mr. Rusesabagina. But just like Vincent, the bâtonnier was nowhere to be found, and I was never able to actually be able to meet with Mr. Rusesabagina during my stay in Rwanda. And I have another client that I was supposed to meet, for whom I have a standing authorization to meet with him in the prison where he's detained. And although in the past I was always able to meet with him without any difficulties, this time around, when we arrived at the prison to meet with him, we were told that the executive secretary of the bar has actually withdrawn my authorization, and I was left before the prison gate, not being allowed to meet with that person at all. So I don't know if it is because of Rusesabagina's case, but I can see that there is a certain deterioration in allowing people in Rwanda to be able to meet with their lawyer of choice. This man I was supposed to meet has a case in Canada. The reason why I wanted to meet him, just like Vincent, had nothing to do with the case in Rwanda, but I was nevertheless completely blocked from having access to my client over there. So it's really painful to see that. The possibility for one accused to see a lawyer of his choice should not be impeded in any manner whatsoever by the authorities of the country where he's detained.
Thank you very much, Philippe. We'll now turn to Anais Kanimba, one of Paul's daughters, to give us a little bit of an update just on what's been happening since the beginning to put everything into context, and how the family has been feeling through the entire process. Anais, could you talk a little bit maybe about the legal process from the beginning and just update us from the family's perspective?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so as you heard, we've really struggled to get access to Dad, and also for Dad to have access to his lawyers. And then, as today we hear that the government has imposed some lawyers on him. One of them called Mr. Rugaza. Our family actually had tried several times to get access to that before Mr. Rugaza did a press conference on September 6th. So if you all remember, my father was taken to custody on August 31st. That day is still a nightmare for us. And since then, that same week, we tried to call Rib several times to get access to Dad. We also had our lawyer, Gatera Gashabana, who's in Kigali, who tried to go see Dad on Thursday and Friday of that very first week. So we tried countless times to see Dad and to talk to him that first week, but we were denied access. And then, to our surprise, on Saturday, September 5th, we saw a press conference in which a man called Mr. Rugaza was my father's lawyer. Of course, we did not accept that because we had not spoken to him. We had, as you've seen, Peter Robinson, Vincent Lurquin, Philippe Larochelle, and others ready to go and defend Dad and ready to go and bring him home. But we weren't able to do so because since the very first day that arrived in Kigali, since the very first day we've known that he's been in custody, we've had zero access to him from a legal perspective, which has made it very difficult for us to even speak to him on a personal level and have in conversations with him that we can feel that he's speaking freely. Most of our conversations with him, we believe, has always been with people in the background because our father, wasn't speaking his mind the way he could speak his mind in the past. So that's why we are really, really trying hard from our perspective to have him see the lawyer so we can finally speak to him. We can finally speak to Dad freely. Until today, we have not been able to do so.
Thank you very much, Anais. If we can go back to Peter Robinson for a moment, if you might just be able to wrap things up for us, Peter, before we go to Q&A.
Thanks, Brian. And I want to thank from the bottom of my heart, Vincent and Philippe, for having the courage to go to Rwanda and taking all that time to try to provide a competent defense to Paul Rusesabagina. I think that's the kind of lawyering that makes all of us in the profession very proud to be serving our clients and seeing how our colleagues can, at their own personal sacrifice, go beyond the call of duty to defend their clients. We hope that someday we'll be in a courtroom with Paul Rusesabagina and he can have the semblance of a defense team. But as things stand right now, as you've heard all of the efforts that the family, Vincent and Philippe and Gatera have made, we still stand here as outsiders watching a show trial which seems to be unfolding in a very unpleasant way. And so we hope that all of those of you listening will help us in trying to ensure that Paul has the lawyers of his choice and that he can be properly defended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, kid.
Thank you very much. We are now going to open to any questions from the media. If you look on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a section entitled Q&A. Please type any questions in there. I think that our presentation today has shown that despite the fact that many well-meaning people and groups have called for a free and fair trial for Paul Rusesabagina, I think everything that we've shown and told you today demonstrates that the likelihood of there being any kind of fair trial is 0 to none. We have our first question that I would like to ask, and the first question is Is there any news from the Belgian government?
Ton micro, Vincent.
Maybe Karine and Vincent, you can answer that together and emphasize each other's answers. Karine, why don't you start and you can add Monsieur Lequin.
I think Monsieur Lequin should start and I'll add to his point.
Non, je vous en prie. Mais donc, au niveau du gouvernement belge, honnêtement, ça fait quand même quelques années qu'on circule un peu partout dans le monde. Ici, visiblement, il y a quand même un appui, en tout cas, des ambassades de Belgique. Je crois vraiment que...
There is support. There is, what we can see now is that there is some support from the Belgian embassies.
Je crois que les autorités rwandaises ont franchi une ligne rouge qui n'est pas acceptable en Belgique.
I believe that the Rwandan authorities have crossed a line, across a red line that is completely unacceptable to the Belgian authorities.
Alors, pour le moment, les autorités judiciaires ont décidé de faire une commission rogatoire, ce qui est quelque chose d'extrêmement positif, parce que si ils ne le faisaient pas, ça laissait aux Rwandais le fait de faire eux seuls le procès.
So for now, the Belgian authorities have decided to appoint a rogatory commission, which is very positive because not having done so would have sent the signal that the Rwandans were left on their own to do the trial.
Mais il faut qu'ils acceptent que les avocats puissent participer à cette commission. S'ils n'acceptent pas, il y a des questions parlementaires qui seront posées la semaine prochaine au Parlement.
But the Rwandans have to accept that the lawyers be part of the rogatory commission. Otherwise, questions will be asked in the parliament.
Donc, il faut que les autorités belges, pour le moment, ça fonctionne plus ou moins. Il faut aller au niveau de l'Europe, ça me semble important. Et ce qui est important, c'est ce que vous faites aussi au niveau des États-Unis. Il est clair que la pression qui se fait par rapport à M. Rusesabagina est positive et est nécessaire pour faire pression sur le gouvernement belge.
So some pressure must be exerted on the Belgian government because we don't think it is doing enough right now. So pressure can be exercised at the level of Europe. Pressure can be exercised at the level of the US. Everywhere where, because Paul is also has a green card from the United States of America. So everywhere where we can add pressure to allow him to, and we're just at the stage of have him being allowed to meet with the counsels of his choice. We are not yet into the issues that may arise during the trial. I'm adding that. Vincent did not say that, but I think it's worth outlining.
Thank you, Philippe and Vincent. Merci beaucoup. I will also add that, of course, we have been applying pressure at every level in the United States, in Belgium, and in the EU. We have been communicating with the United States State Department, with the United States Congress, with different countries' missions to the United Nations. There is more of a United Nations process that I will let one of the lawyers address. Additionally, we have reached out to and been talking with the Belgian ambassador in the United States, with the Belgian Foreign Ministry. We've communicated we have attempted to communicate directly to the new Belgian Prime Minister. And we've got some other specific questions about that. But right now, I'm going to go back to the questions from the reporters in the order that they have come in. From Morgan Windsor at ABC International. Morgan, I'm combining a couple of your questions. She wanted to know, has anyone been able to physically see and speak with Paul in person since he was illegally detained? And is there any idea as to what the condition Paul is in and what conditions in which he are being held? Corinne and Lise, I'm going to direct those questions to you to start off with, please.
So there were a couple consular visits from the Belgian embassy in Rwanda. They went to see him when he was still, before he was moved to the current prison that he is in, and they actually saw him right before he was transferred. So and this was on, I believe, September 16 or 17. So for about a month since he's been to the new place, to the new prison, he has not been, no one from the Belgian embassy has been able to go visit him. As a matter of fact, they're still waiting for an approval from the Rwandan government to go and visit him.
Thank you. I'm going to, I'm just looking at the questions and seeing if we can combine a couple of them to get, that are asking essentially the same thing. One of the next questions is, have we reached out to the United States government? And yes, we have. Anais, if you could talk a little bit about the fact that we've had cooperation both from several congressional offices and the State Department.
Yes, so we've been working hard here in Washington, D.C., trying to get more people to support our cause and our struggle to release Dad. And that State Department, they've been very cooperative and they've been following our case very closely. We've also been working with several Congress representative and senator's office and trying to put together briefings for staffers to inform them of what's happening in the hopes that actions can be taken in the near future.
The next question, I think that this needs to go to both Monsieur Larcan and Philippe, if you can help me translate. Are we viewing the Belgians' decision to share the confidential documents as a sign of their support for Mr. Rusesabagina? And then Peter, second question, are we getting any legal support from US authorities?
Vincent, tu comprends la question? Donc, la question, c'est de savoir si, selon ton expérience d'avocat en Belgique, est-ce que le fait que le juge ait accepté de partager le dossier est un signe du fait qu'il supporte M. Rusesabagina?
Qui supporte, ça c'est peut-être un grand mot, mais en tout cas qu'il pense que la procédure n'est pas tout à fait normale par rapport à son arrestation, ça c'est évident. Je crois que les juges en Belgique ont cette interrogation du fait de savoir s'ils ne sont pas, et c'est rare pour un juge de dire ça, instrumentalisés par le pouvoir rwandais. Et une des... Enfin, dites peut-être déjà ça.
So it is actually something very important, the fact that they allow Maître Lurquin to have access to the file. There might be a fear from the judges that they are being instrumentalized by the Rwandan authorities. So it is not a form of support. I don't think the Belgian authorities will support necessarily Mr. Rusesabagina, but it is clearly an indication that they do not support the kind of procedure and the way it has been adopted and the way things seems to be unfolding right now.
Mais il ne faut pas sous-estimer le pouvoir du pouvoir rwandais en Belgique, parce que je suis parti samedi et le jeudi, ils ont arrêté 3 Rwandais, dont mes clients.
Don't underestimate the influence of the Rwandan authorities on the Belgian authorities, because I left on Saturday and the following Thursday, they arrested 3 Rwandans in Belgium, 2 of whom are my clients.
C'est un dossier qui était ouvert il y a 5 ans, où mon client n'avait jamais été interrogé, et ils ont décidé non seulement de l'interroger, mais de le mettre en prison 2 jours avant qu'on ne parte voir Rusesabagina. Donc, Ne sous-estimons pas l'adversaire.
Let's not underestimate the opponent. We are talking here of a file which had been inactive for 5 years, and the client had never been examined for all this period. And all of a sudden, he's not only examined, but put into prison. So let's not underestimate the opponent.
Monsieur Lequin, do you think that the arrest of the Rwandans in Belgium was retaliation for your representing Paul Rusesabagina? Philippe, Karine, Anaïs, can you help me out?
Happy to go. Vincent, est-ce que vous pensez que l'arrestation de ces 3 Rwandais dernièrement, est-ce que c'était en réponse au fait que mon père a été arrêté au Rwanda et ce que Kagame est en train de faire aujourd'hui?
Il n'y a personne en Belgique qui croit le contraire, évidemment.
Yes,
Et ça, c'est évidemment quelque chose de grave. Mais donc, ça veut dire que à l'intérieur de la magistrature, ils ne sont pas tous du même côté. Et donc, c'est un peu pour ça qu'on doit rappeler aussi qui était votre père, parce que c'est quand même quelqu'un qui était, qu'on le présentait comme un héros, qui a sauvé des gens, qui a sauvé des vies. Mais c'est il y a 25 ans, donc on doit reprendre un peu tout ça pour essayer de faire comprendre aux Belges qu'il faut soutenir la justice et non pas faire ce que l'on a fait il y a 3 jours, mais c'est clair que c'est grave en Belgique.
Yes, it is evident that this was a retaliation on the fact that Dad and the Belgians are trying to support Vincent in seeing my father in Kigali. And so this is clear. In Belgium, it's clear that the Rwandans are retaliating and because of the arrest, and they're also using their political pressure to do that. What's happening is, within the legal space in Belgium, there is some division where some people are more working with the Rwandans, for lack of a better word, instead of following the judicial process. So what happened last week when these 3 Rwandans were arrested out of nowhere is an example of that there are some friction within the Belgian system that allowed this to happen when it shouldn't have happened. And all of this is really a response of the Rwandan government into kind of the fact that Belgium has already tried to take a stand on this issue. It is important to know that, what my father is known for is what he's heroism, what he did during the genocide. That was over 20 years ago. And so in Belgium, and he's known to have saved people, he's a good man, a man of principle, a human rights advocate. But people in Belgium need to be educated to learn about that. Not all of these people know. So within the judicial system, people don't understand the context that we're working in, and some of this have allowed the arrest of these 3 people. But at the same time, there's also parts of the system that it's supporting and that wants to do the right thing, as in the derogatory commissions and other things like that.
Thank you, Anaïs. The next question is for Peter Robinson. Could you comment, and it comes from Sophie Neiman, a journalist who's been covering this situation closely. Could you comment from a legal perspective about the decision, although I think technically it was a suggestion, not a decision, to merge Mr. Rusesabagina's trial with that of 18 alleged members of the FLN, the Front Libération Nationale. And what does this mean for the case should it go forward in Rwanda? Peter, if you could take this one.
Yes, thank you, Kitty. There has been no decision to merge the cases yet, but the prosecutor general has announced his intention to seek to have those cases merged. That requires the approval of the court, and that has not yet been applied for or has been granted. The procedure that we'll be seeing over the next few weeks is that charges will formally be lodged against Paul Rusesabagina, and he will be brought to court to answer those charges. At that time, the issue of joining his case with others will be discussed and debated and decided. But at this stage, his case is proceeding on its own.
Can we talk a little bit just about the problems logistically that any merging of the cases would bring up. And Brian, maybe you want to take
Certainly.
that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Kitty. Even logistically, Rwanda right now is a country that is under COVID lockdown. They have a curfew at 6 p.m. every night. The courts were completely closed and everything was done on video up until Paul's case. They actually cleaned out a courthouse and sanitized it, we understand, before Paul's case. It is a very small courthouse and a very small courtroom. At this point in time, it doesn't seem it would even be logistically possible to have 18 defendants plus Paul, plus all of their lawyers, plus the judges, plus the prosecutors in one place at the same time. We have no idea even physically how that would work, much less the legal details and consequences. So that seems like a very strange situation for the legal system to be putting itself in right now.
Thank you, Brian. And the next question comes from Radio Ormori, and pardon me, Monsieur, from the radio station, if I butchered the name. I did not intend to. And this goes back to the origination of this whole situation, the kidnapping, the arrest, the hijacking of the plane, or at least hijacking of Mr. Rusesabagina, who got onto a plane and did not know the destination. Could you please talk, Peter, about the illegality of the arrest, the kidnapping, Mr. Rusesabagina being held for 3 days, locked up and blindfolded so that he didn't know where he was? Could you talk about, is that a normal way for a Belgian citizen to be taken from his country into Rwanda to stand trial? Is this normal? Is this the way they've dealt with other Rwandan cases abroad?
Yeah, I think the answer is obvious, that it's not only abnormal, but illegal. So if you have a person residing in another country, you can obtain that person for criminal charges through extradition or deportation. And Paul Rusesabagina was living in San Antonio throughout the whole COVID-19 pandemic. And so if the Rwandan government wanted to legally obtain him for prosecution, they should have made a request to the United States government to either extradite or deport him. The United States government has granted deportation almost every time Rwanda has asked when they have sought people for cases involvement in the genocide. So if there was a legitimate case against Paul, it could have been presented to the United States authorities, and they would likely have extradited or deported him if it was a bona fide case. But instead, they didn't do that. Instead, they lured him to a place where they could take him by force and bring him to Rwanda, which is completely illegal. The remedies for that are normally before the court in which you appear. So you would, when you go to court in Rwanda, you would say, I've been arrested illegally. I need to be released. This prosecution is null and void. That wasn't done because he doesn't have lawyers who are fighting for him. And so the lawyers never brought up that issue before the Rwandan court. We have already made a complaint to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture concerning the way Paul was treated after his arrest, as you've mentioned, being tied up and blindfolded and kept incommunicado for 3 days. We plan to make further complaints to the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention to ask for a finding that his arrest was illegal and his subsequent detention remains illegal to this day. We also have some other ideas of other courts that we may try to go to get some relief from this illegal arrest. Thank you.
And I would like to add that we haven't forgotten that GainJet bears some complicity. A GainJet plane transported him. The Dubai airport has not let any tapes be released of him getting on the plane. The Kigali airport has not shown any tapes of him getting off the plane. We don't know who was on the manifest. We haven't forgotten that GainJet has questions to answer. We hope that the media also has not forgotten that GainJet has questions to answer. Additionally, the Dubai government really has never said what happened at the airport, or the UAE government has not said what happened in the airport in Dubai. And this is not the first time that a Belgian citizen has disappeared from the airport in Dubai. There's more examination and more investigative journalism that needs to be done relative to both GainJet and the airport in Dubai. Additionally, we've had questions about what have the Belgians done when we've asked them why hasn't the Belgian government been stronger in demanding that their illegally arrested resident be returned home? And Anais and Corinne, I'd like to direct that one to you, since you have been talking with the Belgian State Department.
So the Belgians are still looking into the kidnapping. Apparently, they need more evidence of that of how he got to Rwanda. In addition to that, the Belgian government. Belgium didn't have a government up until October 1st. So a lot of the processes have been stopped in relation to the Belgian taking a position, the public position on the matter, and they're waiting for the cabinet of the new prime minister, as well as the full government, to be formed in order to further investigate the case and make a decision.
And have they specifically addressed, have they talked with you when you've raised the question with them about Paul being denied access to his Belgian attorneys and his international attorneys? And have they given you any kind of deadline for their investigation?
They have not.
And have they given you any idea about what other facts they need to learn before they will move?
So they were waiting for Maître Lurquin and Dad to speak in order to hear directly from Dad what happened. However, Maître Lurquin wasn't allowed to go see Dad, so even that was stopped from happening from the Rwandans.
Peter, I'm going to send this one back to you to speak on behalf of all of the international lawyers. The question is from one of the journalists who covers Rwanda quite a bit, even Mugisha. Rwanda's systems require foreign lawyers to apply at the Bar Association to represent a client in Rwanda. Have you sought the authorization from the Bar Association? If yes, what was their response? If no? I know that Monsieur Lurquin did cover this, but Peter, if you can kind of go back and summarize the problems with the Bar Association.
Yes. So Vincent, as he has explained to you, has applied with the Bar Association to be allowed to represent Paul Rusesabagina, and he spent the week looking for the bâtonnier, the president of the Bar Association, with no success. And Philippe also has presented his papers to the bâtonnier of the Rwandan Bar Association. The rest of us intend to do that once Gatera Gashambana is accepted as the lawyer for Paul Rusesabagina, and we can join that team. Thank you.
Mais comme Philippe l'a dit également, donc son bâtonnier est intervenu. Le bâtonnier de Bruxelles est intervenu de manière très claire quand j'étais au Rwanda. Il demandait une série de documents qu'on lui a donnés et le bâtonnier a demandé que le bâtonnier Ouganda nous aide à voir M. Rusesabagina. Donc, effectivement, l'ensemble des autres bâtonniers pourraient peut-être faire pression.
So, both the bâtonnier of the Quebec Bar and the bâtonnier of the Brussels Bar intervened with Kavaruganda, the bâtonnier of the Kigali Bar Association, to request the necessary authorization for us. We're not talking of doing a trial here, but we're talking of seeing a client. So, and the necessary papers were sent, the authorizations, the request for authorizations were sent to Kavaruganda from both Quebec and Belgium. And despite that, there has never been a positive answer.
Thank
Et donc, c'est vrai que les bâtonniers, peut-être de différents pays, pourraient intervenir auprès du bâtonnier Kavaruganda pour lui dire que le but de l'avocat, c'est pas d'interdire à l'avocat de voir son client, mais de lui permettre de le faire.
He calls for other bâtonniers, other heads of bars association from other countries to also intervene and ask why a lawyer would prevent another lawyer, a fellow lawyer, to see his own client. So there's a call to action to all bâtonniers and head of bar association to uphold.
And just to be clear, this has not happened to Philippe when you have been in Rwanda before. You have not been barred from seeing, you have not been prevented from seeing your clients, correct?
Never.
This has only happened because you have uttered the name Rusesabagina, which is the name that cannot be said in Rwanda, according to Monsieur Lerquin.
Look, I did not receive a letter to that effect, but I don't see any other reasons, because this is the only thing that changed since last time I went there. Just for Maître Lurquin, since 5 years that his client has been freed, the only thing that changed in the meantime is the fact that he was appointed by the family of Mr. Rusesabagina to represent him. So, of course, he did not receive a letter from the Rwandan authorities telling him that, if you choose to represent Mr. Rusesabagina, you have this kind of problems, but there is a clear link between the two.
I just note of moderator privilege. I can't go to Rwanda because the president has said that I must be killed. But I have heard that in the Hotel Mille Collines, if you go to the gift shop, there are no copies of the movie Hotel Rwanda in the gift shop. Paul Rusesabagina's book, An Ordinary Man, is not available in the gift shop of the hotel that he saved during the genocide, along with those 1,268 people. And I have also been told that if you ask about Mr. Rusesabagina in the Hotel Mille Collines, the staff will look very scared and turn away from you. I've only heard this. I don't know it to be true, but I think that based upon Monsieur...
I did not ask. I don't know that Vincent did ask.
We've heard this from a few people over the years, and I apologize for my digression, but I think that it's further illustration of the fact that this is not a normal trial. This is being done for retaliation and as a political move against a humanitarian who has spent the last 15 years speaking out on behalf of people who have had their human rights violated, journalists who have been killed, political dissidents who have been jailed. And I think we know that that's why this trial is being handled the way it is. Brian, I'm going to throw it back to you for wrap up.
Thank you very much, Kitty. I'm going to pick up where Kitty left off there and just go through this a little bit more to bring things together. From a legal perspective on this case, Paul Rusesabagina was kidnapped in Dubai. He was brought by illegal rendition to Rwanda against his will. That is illegal under international law. He was arrested and is being detained illegally in Rwanda. Again, illegal under international law because he was not brought there legally. That is the absolute center point of this case. Paul Rusesabagina simply should not be there. Any of the other legal issues should not be discussed in that context. We'll go beyond that, though, and we have spoken beyond that today. That's still the primary issue. But even if you accept that Paul is there and on trial, this is clearly also an illegal and completely unfair trial process in Rwanda. Paul's family and team, along with many, many past precedents in Rwandan cases, show that a fair and impartial trial is simply not going to happen in this case. Going very briefly through that timeline again, Paul was effectively tortured for the first 3 days he was in captivity, with his hands and feet bound and a blindfold on for that time. He's been held incommunicado from his family and from his family designated lawyers for much of the last 53 days and has only had a handful of contacts with the outside world. He has no access to his legal team until just this week. We're beginning to get access. The Rwandan government has consistently and continues to put up new blocks and new barriers every time a lawyer tries to see Paul, whether that is Gatera Gashabana, a respected lawyer in Kigali, or whether it is various members of the international legal team, including Vincent Larcan and Philippe Larochelle. The only lawyers who have represented Paul in court are from the Rwandan government. We fully believe they are representing the interests of the Rwandan government, and they have not been representing Paul's legal interest. As Kitty said, we know why this is happening. Paul Rusesabagina is seen by Rwandan President Kagame as his key political enemy, not because Paul is running against him for office, but because Paul speaks out in public. He speaks about human rights abuses. He speaks about the real situation in Rwanda. He speaks in ways that people inside of Rwanda are unable to speak in criticizing the current government that is there. That's what brought him to this position. And unfortunately, that's what says that Paul has no chance of a fair trial. I want to thank everyone who's joined us. I want to thank members of the family, Anais, Lise, Corinne, for being here. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Peter, Vincent, and Philippe for giving the legal perspective, and Kitty Kurth and Kevin Lampy for putting this press conference together. Thank you all very much for joining us too.
Thank you and goodbye. If you have any further questions, you can send them via email. We appreciate your attention and your covering this matter. Thank you very much.